Don't be like him. Dad used me as a bad example at my cousin's promotion party until the CEO shook my hand and called me boss. I had already decided how the evening would go before I left my apartment. Not in the I'm going to have fun sense, but in the I'm going to survive it sense. That's usually how family gatherings worked for me. No matter how dressed up I got, or how polite I tried to be, my father had a way of turning my presence into the butt of a joke. The difference this time was I'd stopped reacting months ago. You only get blindsided so many times before you start carrying your own armor. The mirror by my front door reflected someone who could pass for calm. Dark jacket, crisp shirt, hair combed with just enough intention to look like I hadn't tried too hard. My phone buzzed with the reminder my cousin's promotion party started in 30 minutes. Good. Enough time to walk instead of drive. Enough time to clear my head before walking into a room where every smile came with a measuring tape. The venue was one of those places that looked like it was built specifically to be photographed. Tall glass windows glowed from the inside, spilling soft light onto the sidewalk. Inside, I could already see a swirl of people, men in tailored suits, women in sleek dresses, clusters of relatives catching up in polite half-hugs. My cousin had earned a management role at his company, and judging from the way my aunt had been talking all week, you'd think he'd single-handedly solved the national debt. As soon as I stepped inside, the smell of catered appetizers and freshly polished floors hit me. The noise was a steady hum. Laughter, the clink of silverware, the low swell of background music. My father spotted me almost instantly. His smile was wide, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Glad you could make it," he said, patting my shoulder like I'd wandered in by accident. His suit was newer than mine, the kind of thing he bought just for events like this. He scanned me quickly, as if checking whether I was presentable enough to stand next to. "I wouldn't miss it," I said. It was true, though not for the reasons he assumed. I'd learned a long time ago that sometimes it's better to be in the room when the comments happen than to hear about them secondhand. We moved toward the main area where long tables held plates of appetizers, pitchers of sparkling juice, and carefully arranged decorations in my cousin's company colors. The crowd was a mix: family friends, and several faces I didn't recognize. They had the kind of polished confidence that doesn't come from being born into the family. I clocked them without staring. Strangers at a family event usually meant professional connections. My aunt was in full hostess mode, greeting each person like they'd been friends for decades. She pulled me into a hug, then whispered, "Make sure you eat something. I don't want you fading away on me." I nodded and let her move on to her next guest. I kept to the edge of the room, avoiding the center where my cousin was holding court. He was basking in attention, telling stories with animated hand gestures, his new title practically glowing above his head. I didn't envy him. The spotlight has a way of burning. It didn't take long for my father to start chatting up people near the podium, laughing too loud at his own lines. He was always the one to grab the microphone when the moment came, even if he wasn't on the program. I had a feeling tonight would be no different. When the speeches started, I stayed near the back. My aunt went first, proud and glowing, telling everyone about my cousin's work ethic, his leadership skills, and his dedication to the company. Applause followed, and my cousin gave a short thank you speech that was exactly the right amount of humble and confident. Then my father stepped up. No one had asked him to, but he acted like it was expected. "We're all proud of Mark here," he began, nodding toward my cousin. "Worked hard, kept his focus, made something of himself. That's what you like to see in the younger generation." He paused, then smiled a little too wide. "And of course, I just hope the younger ones in the family don't end up like—" He turned, pointed directly at me. "This guy." The laugh he let out was sharp enough to slice the air. A few guests chuckled, but most shifted uncomfortably, unsure if they'd just witnessed a joke or a jab. I felt every eye swing toward me. My instinct was to force a grin, and I did, small, polite, like I'd just been caught off guard by a harmless quip. Inside, though, the words landed like they always did. Not surprising, but heavy. My father moved on quickly, praising my cousin again, oblivious, or pretending to be oblivious, to the ripple he'd just caused. The applause that followed was quieter than before. I didn't clap. I just watched, When the speeches ended, I drifted toward the back corner near the buffet. The room was loosening up again, conversations resuming, people sipping drinks and nibbling on snacks. That's when I noticed them, the handful of people I didn't know earlier. They weren't mingling aimlessly. They seemed to be scanning the room, checking in with certain guests. Their suits were better cut than most of my relatives could afford, and their shoes were the kind you don't wear unless someone else is paying for them. Across the room, my father was deep in conversation with a man in a sharp, dark suit. He was leaning forward slightly, laughing in a way that was just a bit too eager. I didn't know the man, but I recognized the type, someone important enough to make my father's tone change. I stayed where I was, keeping my expression neutral. The party was shifting, though I couldn't tell why yet. And I had a feeling that whatever was coming next wasn't going to fit neatly into my father's version of the night. The corner of the room I'd chosen wasn't exactly hidden, but it gave me space. From there, I could watch without being dragged into conversations I didn't want. My father's voice still carried over the background noise. He had shifted from joking about me to telling a story about the old days, his hands cutting the air with each exaggerated memory. The man in the dark suit beside him listened with polite attention, the kind you give when you're letting someone run out of steam. Across the crowd, my cousin was shaking hands with a cluster of colleagues, his smile firmly in place. I could tell from the way his shoulders stayed squared that he was still running on the high of his promotion. He'd earned the praise, I had no doubt about that, but the evening felt less about him and more about how everyone else could attach themselves to his moment. Then the door near the front opened, and a small shift went through the room. Not loud, not announced, just a subtle tightening of posture from the people who noticed first. 3 men and a woman stepped inside, dressed in a way that said they didn't have to prove anything to anyone. The kind of people who carried their own center of gravity wherever they went. They weren't family, and they weren't random friends of my cousin. These were professionals. The man in the lead scanned the room once, then started moving forward with a deliberate pace. People stepped aside without being asked, conversations pausing mid-sentence. It wasn't just respect, it was recognition. I didn't know him yet, but I could read the room well enough to see that others did. My father didn't notice them right away. He was still locked into his own performance, trying to impress the man in front of him. But the suited man he'd been speaking to noticed. His attention flicked past my father to the group that had just entered. A small, almost imperceptible smile touched his mouth. Then he excused himself and moved toward them. I watched the ripple of awareness spread. My aunt's voice dropped half a notch as she greeted another guest, her eyes darting toward the entrance. My cousin, mid-conversation, glanced over his shoulder and straightened. Even the servers began moving with slightly more precision, like someone had just raised the stakes without saying a word. The leader of the group didn't stop to chat with anyone along the way. His eyes moved through the crowd as if searching for something, or someone. The people he passed greeted him quietly, a few even nodding with the kind of respect that only comes from knowing what someone can do for your career. I kept still, my plate untouched on the small table beside me. If he was here for my cousin, he'd be making a straight line toward the center of the room. But his trajectory was slightly off. Not toward my cousin. Not toward my father. Closer to where I was standing. My father finally caught sight of him and seemed to wake up to the fact that someone important had entered the room. His face brightened instantly. He half turned toward the path of the man's walk, preparing that familiar blend of charm and opportunism he used whenever he thought he was about to meet someone worth impressing. The man's pace didn't change. If anything, it became more precise. Behind him, the woman and the 2 other men kept an easy formation, not crowding him, but not trailing either. They spoke to each other quietly, scanning the space as they went. These weren't random guests, they were connected. This was a team. The suited man my father had been talking to returned, this time shadowing the group. His body language had shifted. He was now the one positioning himself in their orbit, not the other way around. I leaned slightly against the wall, keeping my face neutral. I wasn't sure yet why they were here, but the pull in my gut told me it wasn't random. My father glanced toward me briefly, maybe to see if I looked impressed. I didn't give him anything. The group reached the midpoint of the room, where the flow of guests thinned just enough for them to pause. The leader exchanged a quick word with the man who'd rejoined them, his voice low enough that I couldn't catch it. Whatever was said, it made the other man nod and angle his head toward me. For the first time all night, my father's expression faltered. He followed the gesture, eyes landing on me, then flicking back to the suited man. There was a moment of visible calculation. He couldn't quite place what was happening, but he didn't like being on the outside of it. The leader turned fully now, and his eyes locked on mine. Not a long stare, but long enough to let me know it was intentional. Then he started moving again, straight in my direction. The sound in the room dimmed in a way that had nothing to do with volume and everything to do with attention. Conversations near me slowed, voices dropping as people noticed where he was headed. My cousin's gaze followed too, confusion knitting his brow. My father, caught between wanting to intercept and not wanting to look overeager, took a half step in my direction, then hesitated. The hesitation cost him. The suited man closed the last few feet before my father could insert himself. He stopped in front of me, his expression shifting into a faint smile. Not the forced kind you give for photographs. This was recognition, familiarity. Behind him, his team fanned slightly, giving space without breaking formation. My father was now just a step behind him, leaning in to catch any word that might give away the nature of this connection. The man opened his mouth to speak, but didn't yet. He just studied me for a moment, as if confirming something he already knew. The pause wasn't long, but it was enough to thicken the air between us. Around us, the crowd's curiosity sharpened. My pulse didn't change. Whatever this was, I'd learned not to give away the first move. He finally spoke, and when he did, his tone carried the kind of weight that made people stop mid-sentence to listen. "Good to see you again, boss." The words landed with the kind of clarity that doesn't need volume. People within a few feet froze mid-conversation. My father's face shifted instantly, confusion, disbelief, and something else he couldn't mask fast enough. I took his hand without rushing, my grip steady. "Likewise," I said. "No explanation." No rush to fill the silence. The man's smile widened slightly. "I was hoping you'd be here tonight. We've been looking forward to the next update on the project." Now there were eyes on me from every direction. My cousin was still halfway across the room, blinking like he'd misheard something. The group that had come in with the man spread subtly, as if creating a quiet barrier around us. My father tried to find his way into the conversation. "You two know each other?" His voice aimed for casual, but it cracked just enough to show it wasn't. The man didn't even glance at him. "We've been working together for months. He's been leading the kind of operation you don't talk about lightly." He turned slightly toward the others nearby, his tone opening just enough for the surrounding guests to hear. "Frankly, he's the reason we've been able to move forward as fast as we have." Someone in the group behind him murmured agreement. Another nodded. My father stood frozen in the space between us, trying to recalibrate. "I didn't realize." "You wouldn't," I said, still keeping my voice calm. "It's not something I've brought up at family events." The man chuckled lightly, not unkindly. "And yet here you are, underestimating him. Happens more often than you'd think." He turned back to me. "We should set a time next week. The investors are eager to see the next phase." "Tuesday works," I replied. From the corner of my eye, I saw my cousin starting to make his way over, but he was moving slower now. He didn't seem sure whether to interrupt. My aunt was watching from near the buffet, her expression caught somewhere between curiosity and calculation. The suited man who'd been speaking with my father earlier approached, carrying 2 glasses of sparkling juice. He handed one to the CEO, then looked directly at me. "It's good to finally meet you in person. I've heard more than a few impressive things." I nodded. "Appreciate that." The CEO clinked his glass lightly against mine. "You keep doing what you're doing. It's working." There was no big announcement, no grand gesture, just the weight of the exchange sinking into the room. People understood what they'd just seen, even if they didn't have the details. The man everyone had been giving space to had walked past the promotion star of the night, past the self-appointed host, and gone straight to me, and called me boss. The group stayed a few more minutes, exchanging quiet words, making a couple of introductions. Then the CEO gave me a parting handshake and said, "We'll talk Tuesday," before heading out the same way they came in. The room's volume didn't return to normal immediately. It lingered in a kind of suspended awareness. My father tried to speak, but nothing he started managed to land. I didn't press it. There was nothing to explain. The rest of the night moved in a different rhythm. My cousin still got his congratulations. My aunt kept playing hostess, but the attention had shifted in ways they couldn't pull back. People I barely knew made a point of stopping by to shake my hand, to say they'd heard about my work, even if they didn't know exactly what it was. When I finally left, my father was still standing near the podium, his smile thin and tight. I gave him a nod on the way out. Funny thing is, I never corrected him. Let him think I was just drifting along. Turns out, drifting pays well.